Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have another year of video gaming behind us, and you know what that means. It's time for me to make my annual Gipty video. I have to go ahead and say that 2015 has been one of the best years for gaming in quite some time. No matter what you're interested in, I think there is something for everyone to play and enjoy this year. A lot of smaller games came out that ended up taking me by surprise, and enough interesting mainstream games came out this year to finally convince me to grab a current-gen console. We had a streak of jaw-dropping announcements to get us excited for next year and for years to come. Konami became Pachinko Hitler. Companies repackaged ROMs and emulators as official products. And most shocking of all, the Game Awards weren't completely awful. I could go on, but that's not why we're here. For the second year in a row, I've made a list of the top 10 games I played this year. Though, that being said, only one game on this list isn't from 2015. I'd like to clarify that the only way I determine these rankings is through personal enjoyment, and I'm not trying to state that any one of these games is objectively better than the other. That might sound silly and obvious, but to be honest, every year I'm shocked at the amount of people getting nasty in comment sections when various sites post their Game of the Year lists. This really shouldn't be something that people get upset over. And hey, if you really want to get your opinion out there, why not create a Game of the Year list of your own? I think stuff like this should be more about celebration than dumb internet arguments. So why don't we get on with the celebrating? Here are my top 10 games that I played in 2015. If you had told me last year that one of my most memorable gaming experiences of 2015 would be a teen drama with supernatural thriller elements, I probably would have laughed at you. What I love about Life is Strange is that it takes a story that probably would have been written off as generic or derivative in any other medium and made a damn good interactive experience out of it instead. The game combines common elements from both coming-of-age and time travel fiction to tell the story of a young adult trying to find their way through life while reality seems to fall apart around them. Yep, screw it. I'm just gonna say it. Life is Strange takes a lot from Donnie Darko, one of my favorite movies growing up, and that's probably why I connected to it as well as I did initially. It's not to say that the game lacks an identity of its own, however. The game's excellent art design and music choice creates a wonderful back-to-school autumn atmosphere. I think one of the early moments in the game that really won me over and made me realize how dedicated the developers were to crafting a believable high school environment was going into the main character's journal and seeing a reference to borrowing a USB drive so that she could watch Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's such a small detail, but it made me nostalgic for the days of meeting up with friends between classes in crowded hallways and exchanging games and movies. The game is full of little touches like that, and it really fleshes out the world in a way that other Telltale-style adventure games don't even come close to reaching. That's not to say that Life is Strange relies on nostalgia to carry itself, however. The characters are strongly written despite some awkward dialogue decisions in the first two episodes, and while I do think that episodes 2 and 5 stumble a bit, the main narrative ended up being pretty solid as well. The story makes an honest attempt at tackling subject matter not often brought up in video games, and while certain things could have probably been handled better, the overall step forward that Life is Strange made in terms of showing what can be done within a choice-based story more than make up for it. I hope to see more games like Life is Strange in the future. I think that the combination of this game and Until Dawn both finding the success that they did this year show that you can reach an audience that normally wouldn't be too interested in video games by borrowing elements from stories common in other mediums and retooling them to work in a player-driven yet fairly linear game. Life is Strange isn't perfect, but in an industry where most games build upon or borrow heavily from well-established ideas, it felt like a nice breath of fresh air. Announced only 2 days before it came out, The Beginner's Guide was a game that took the world by surprise. The game is only an hour and a half long and is entirely story-driven, so I'm going to keep it short for those of you who haven't experienced it yet. The Beginner's Guide explores creativity, interpretation, and critique in a way that I haven't seen elsewhere. It's quite divisive, but whether you love it or hate it, you have to admit the discussions this story triggered about game development and criticism are some of the most interesting this medium has ever seen. While I can't say that this game was great enough for me to place higher on this list, of my top 10 this is easily the one that delivered the greatest emotional impact. It touched on multiple ideas that resonated with me quite strongly, and it left me with a bizarrely personal experience. If you're at all interested, I'd say that The Beginner's Guide is worth giving a shot. You can play it all in one sitting, and you never know, you might get a lot more out of it than you expected. I've gone on record saying that I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of roguelite games. Sure, I enjoy my time with them and I think they're overall great games, but a lot of them lack the depth and balance of classic roguelikes. Downwell is the first roguelite I've played that successfully takes procedurally generated obstacles and upgrades and slaps them onto a simple yet challenging skill-based gameplay system. This game is like crack. The fast-paced, reflex-oriented platforming and shooting ensures that the game avoids the problem other roguelites face of random number generation screwing with the difficulty. Upgrades are useful, and while I do prefer some of them over others, I don't think I would call any of them specifically overpowered or useless. Downwell is available for both iOS and PC, and I've sunk a decent amount of time into both versions at this point. It's easy to throw on a podcast and get lost in this game for an hour or two at a time, losing run after run in an attempt to finally get to the bottom of this damn well. The unlockable character styles and customization options make each run of Downwell feel unique, and no matter how good or bad you perform, it's always a blast to play. If you value energetic and difficult gameplay, Downwell is a game worth grabbing. Devil May Cry is back and better than ever. The original DMC4 was praised for its fun combat and Dante's new on-the-fly style switching system, but also criticized for feeling incredibly unfinished and forcing players to spend the second half of the game going through the first half backwards. While the game's layout and level design are still an issue, Special Edition adds in 3 new playable characters that help make the game feel a lot more fleshed out than it originally did. Virgil, Lady, and Trish are all fun to play and provide a different experience to the core game. While it's obvious that some areas were designed with Nero or Dante in mind, they are few and far between and never hurt my enjoyment any more than an occasional annoyance. The newcomers' movesets are, in traditional DMC style, easy to pick up and understand but hard to master. Scoring triple S combos has never felt better. Many owners of current-gen consoles have complained that companies have spent too much time and energy this generation remastering and re-releasing old games instead of making new ones. And while I think that's a valid criticism, I think far too many people dismiss the impact that a well-done re-release can have on a game. A handful of well-thought-out additions to the base game paved the way for hours upon hours of familiar yet fresh gameplay in the case of DMC4. Capcom has been dropping hints for Devil May Cry 5 for quite some time now, and if they put as much love and care into making that game as they did Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Western RPGs have definitely changed over the years. Games that were originally designed to emulate tabletop role-playing have been simplified and streamlined as budgets get bigger and accessibility becomes a priority. But with the advent of Kickstarter, old-school computer RPGs are starting to make a comeback, and Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity proves that even though mainstream Western RPG game design has changed over the years, there's still a lot that can be done with the traditional isometric style. Pillars aim to be a successor to the classic Baldur's Gate games, and while I can't say I'm very familiar with those games, it does more than enough to feel like a game made in the 90s, yet with enough modern polish to stand toe-to-toe with the gameplay of contemporary RPGs. Pillars uses a real-time with pause combat system similar to the one found in the old Infinity Engine games, and it's brutal as hell. The game warns you to start on easy and work your way up to the higher difficulties when you're feeling more confident, a warning which I ignored and I came to regret. I started the game on normal and never once touched the difficulty slider, and holy shit, this game is brutal. A combination of my stubborn attitude and some poor character build decisions left me feeling lost, beaten, and confused as I traveled the Direwood countryside. But that just made every victorious enemy encounter and completed side quest all the more rewarding. I sunk a good 60 hours into my first playthrough of this game, and I have every intention of going back and playing through a second time after the final expansion pack comes out. The Phantom Pain is probably the most flawed masterpiece I've ever seen. The game somehow manages to deliver over 100 hours of incredible gameplay, yet by the end can feel painfully repetitive depending on how you spent that time. The story has some of the greatest emotional highs in the Metal Gear series, and delivers an ending that serves as a beautiful send-off to the franchise, but still manages to be overall underwhelming and light on content. This game was probably the hardest for me to find a spot for on this list. Even as late as a week or two ago, I was scrambling to figure out where exactly this one placed. In that sense, I think it's fitting that it ended up somewhere right in the middle. This game went through a lengthy development process and is rumored to have had an absurd budget, yet still left many with the impression that it was released in a heavily unfinished state, especially when one considers the cut ending included with the limited edition of the game. That being said, I think it's a testament to the Phantom Pain's overall quality that despite its many shortcomings, there are hours upon hours of fun open-world stealth and action to be had with MGS5. It's a shame that we might not see Kojima Productions' Fox engine used in future games, because the amount of interesting player interactions it allows for in a large and detailed world is one of the most damn impressive things I've ever seen in gaming. While the final chapter of the Metal Gear saga released in the middle of a series of highly questionable and controversial decisions by its publisher, I sincerely believe that Kojima and the rest of the Koji Pro team did their best to make the greatest ending they possibly could have for a widely loved series. I'm happy that Kojima can finally put his time spent with Konami behind him, and even if it didn't exactly live up to expectations, seeing one of my favorite game series give its final farewell was one of the most memorable gaming experiences for me in 2015. The Last of Us is a game that I figured I'd enjoy going into it. The near universal praise it received after its original PS3 release was enough to convince me that the game was a solid shooter that told a great story. I was expecting my playthrough to make me feel like I was just going through the motions, and that for some reason me being late to the party would dampen my time with it. I'm happy to say that this isn't the case, however, because The Last of Us blew me away with how it masterfully combines strong gameplay, narrative, presentation, and sound design into one amazingly cohesive package. Despite zombies feeling like they've overstayed their welcome for a bit too long in AAA video games, the infected enemies you encounter in the ruins of suburban America always feel like a real threat, and the moment-to-moment gameplay will have you on the edge of your seat. The Last of Us isn't the most original game around, and I don't think it does anything particularly new or innovative, but it does what it set out to do incredibly well, and for that alone I think it stands out from your average AAA game. Joel seems pretty generic as far as protagonists go, but as the game progresses you come to understand him and his worldview, even if you don't necessarily agree with it or what he does. Ellie is probably the best written child character I've ever seen in a game, in part due to her ability to take care of herself while still feeling realistically youthful and innocent to the harsher truths of the world. The game does a fantastic job of making you care about both of these characters, and by the time their journey has come to an end you'll see why The Last of Us is seen as a highlight in the vast sea of post-apocalyptic zombie games. If you watched my Gipty video from last year, you'll probably remember that I absolutely adored Dark Souls. It shouldn't be a surprise, then, that as soon as I got a PS4, one of the first games I went out to purchase was Bloodborne. Bloodborne's faster-paced, agility-focused combat really intrigued me, and when I finally got my hands on it I was happy to find that it felt just as engaging as it looked. While Dark Souls fell victim to some time constraints and suffered from a dip in quality towards the end, Bloodborne's level design remains consistently high quality until the credits roll. While taking obvious inspiration from the Souls games that came before it, Bloodborne does more than enough to stand out on its own. Aside from the faster gameplay, the change in aesthetic from dark fantasy to gothic and Lovecraftian horror provides a wonderful excuse to use a new and unique setting. The ruined city of Yharnam and surrounding areas are beautifully designed from both a gameplay and visual point of view. In traditional Souls fashion, the beasts that inhabit the game world will send shivers down your spine, and the surviving people, at least the ones who still have their wits about them, don't have to go out of their way to make you feel uncomfortable when you're around them either. Souls games have always had some horror elements to them, but Bloodborne plays up the grotesque landscapes and anxiety-inducing enemy encounters as much as it possibly can, and to great effect. I can't say that I enjoyed Bloodborne as much as I enjoyed Dark Souls, but it comes pretty damn close. That being said, I have to admit that the reasons I enjoy Dark Souls more comes down to personal preference, mostly in regards to minor story and customization stuff. For what it's worth, overall I do think Bloodborne is the better designed game. It feels like it had a more focused creative vision during development, and was given a bit more time in the oven to be polished up before release. So why don't you just go out and kill a few beasts? It's for your own good. Majora's Mask is a game that's been near and dear to my heart ever since I played it when it first came out, not too long after my 7th birthday. Ocarina of Time was one of the first few games I ever played, and probably a big reason as to why I love games as much as I do now. I liked Majora's Mask as a kid, but it wasn't until I revisited the game 7 years later as a 14-year-old when I absolutely fell in love with it. I realized then that I had been far too young to pick up on the dark undertones and subtle storytelling being done in the side quests, and to be frank, I was kind of surprised that the game never scared the shit out of me. After beating Majora's Mask that second time, it became my favorite Zelda title, and I think it was partially responsible for forming my gravitation towards stories with a darker tone. And so, I find myself, once again at the end of another period of 7 years, playing Majora's Mask once more. I didn't really think it was possible, but after all these years I'm still finding new things to appreciate about this game that I never really picked up on as a kid. Skull Kid's backstory is even more tragic than I remember, and now that I have a bit more life experience under my belt, the displays of grief, denial, and anxiety the NPCs give as reactions to the climate of death and despair around them hits a little closer to home than I like. The developers used the opportunity presented by the remake to improve upon the original's gameplay. While some hardcore fans are strongly against the changes made, I personally believe that the shift to a portable platform more than justified the developers' choices. Most of the changes were either made to make the game more pick-up-and-play friendly or streamline some of the more tedious or annoying parts of the original. The only change to the game that I actually felt a little bummed out by was the upgrade in visual quality. I find that the less muddy graphics and improved draw distance take away a bit of the creepy atmosphere the original Nintendo 64 game had, but asking a company to remake a game and intentionally refuse to upgrade the visuals is obviously unrealistic, so I'm not too beat up over it. Even if you aren't the biggest Zelda fan, I think Majora's Mask is worth spending some time with. The greater focus on side quests and exploration instead of dungeon crawling makes it stand out from the other, more formulaic Zelda games. My experience with Majora's Mask 3D further cemented its place as being one of my top 5 favorite games of all time. I have a sneaking suspicion I'll once again rediscover why 7 years from now. If you've ever heard me talk for even just 5 minutes about the original Devil Survivor 2, you probably saw this coming. I don't know what else to say that I haven't already said in multiple podcasts and Twitter posts that I haven't said before, so I'm going to keep it short. Record Breaker took a game that I already loved and gave me more to love. The original story mode received an updated translation and wonderful English dub, but the true meat of the new content is the 30-hour Triangulum arc that serves as a built-in sequel to the events of the original game. When adding more story to something that was already self-sustainable and was given proper closure, the risk of making something that feels forced and uninspired is always there, and it can end up feeling like a cheap cash-in that feels unnecessary to the overall package. The answer. Thankfully, the Triangulum arc feels like it was shown just as much love and care as the first story mode. Sure, it didn't really need to be there, but I think it'd be hard for someone to say that the overall Devil Survivor 2 experience isn't improved by the Triangulum arc's inclusion. With an unforgettable cast of characters and an unparalleled amount of party customization, I'm happy to say that without a doubt Record Breaker is my #1 game I played in 2015. And that's my top 10 list. I can't help but feel incredibly spoiled by what this year had to offer. I'd feel pretty confident giving every game in the second half of this list a perfect 10 out of 10, and my 2 favorite games this year were re-releases of 2 games that were already in my top 5 favorite games ever. As for next year, there's quite a few games I'm looking forward to. Shin Megami Tensei 4 finally easily has me more excited than anything else, and I can't wait to get my hands on more mainline SMT fun. I'm still looking forward to Persona 5, let's just hope it doesn't get delayed again. Dark Souls 3 looks like it's going to be the final Souls game, at least done in this style, and I'm excited to see how it closes out the series. There's a lot more games I'm pretty hyped about, but if I list them all, we'll be here forever, so I'm just going to cut it off there. Thank you to everyone who's been following my content throughout 2015, especially those of you who have stuck around despite the conclusion of the Cathedral of Shadows podcast. I have a few videos planned, mostly in-depth looks at some games I've been playing through as of late, and another I'm finishing up that talks about how the execution of a game's combat can add or detract from a narrative. I still don't have much of an update on the copyright fiasco surrounding my Shin Megami Tensei 1 Let's Play, and while I was originally planning to record a Deus Ex Let's Play in the meantime, my plans for that kind of fell through, and I think for now I'll just hold off on Let's Play content until I can finish up that SMT1 LP without fear of my videos being blocked in certain regions. I hope all of you had a great 2015, and that 2016 treats you just as well. Goodbye for now.